Before you get into too much of the material in Cengage, what I wanted to do was just to take a quick side sortie here and talk about the design of your tables before I tear you loose, frankly, on the material for the week. So, as you were in session one, as you were going through and working with the material here in Cengage, you would have noticed that on average there were about 4 or 5 tables in each one of those practice areas. So whether or not they were projects or whether or not they were through the training, you would have noticed that on average there were 4 or 5 tables in each one of those. And what I'm going to suggest is that that is awfully superficial. When we really look at databases, when we really look at data collection so that we can get information out of that data that we can disseminate then to whomever, the management team, that we can disseminate to our sales force, that we can disseminate to our investors, wherever it goes, wherever that information goes. You are at some point going to be tasked with wrestling with the following design consideration. Is it better to have more tables with more rows, or is it better to have, I got that exactly backwards. Hold on. Is it better to have fewer tables with more rows, or is it better to have more tables with fewer rows? You can go, don't do this because it will drive you crazy, and it's the week of the holiday, and I think that we are all of us crazy enough. You could go out there and ask the opinion of 50 database designers, and you're going to get 25 answers one way, 25 answers the other. It is better to have fewer tables with more rows. It is better to have more tables with fewer rows. And there's reasons that both of those are in fact correct. And the one thing I have said, not just here in a database course, I have said this across all of the courses that I teach. I have said this across all of the experience that I have, and all of the experience that you guys come to me with, is your experience and the things that you have encountered really informs all of your opinion. And that's the way that that should be. But your experience is not the sum and total of everybody's experience out there. And anytime you get an answer like, it's clear, it's black and white, it is always more tables, or it's clear, it's black and white, it is always more rows, that simply means that the individual you are talking to has had an experience or has had a host of experiences that tell them this is the only way that things go. And, maybe in my career, I know I have, in my career, let's change that. In my career, I have, in fact, used those kinds of absolutes, and I don't think that that's the case anymore, right? Because as an instructor or as a consultant, I have been exposed to other people's opinions which have changed my mind, which is something that not everybody has the opportunity to do. So let me try to let you know why some organizations will choose more tables with fewer rows of data, and why other organizations will take the opposite view of that. They will take fewer tables with more rows of data. Now, what I will tell you is the best practice is to have more tables with fewer rows of data, because the following. The fewer lines of data, the fewer rows of data, the fewer data points you have in a table, the less likely any new considerations down the road are going to screw up something that you have in those tables. So let me give you an example here. Is if we are getting client data. So whether or not let's just use RVC, Rock Valley College, as the organization and students as the clients, right? So if we are getting client data, we would have data that we need to collect clearly. And I think that probably we could start with things like name, address, phone number, stuff like that, right? So before we get crazy and just put all of that in one table, we should think about this for just a second. Look at the data points in there. Is it okay that I just give you name, or is that maybe not the best way to address the data? It's really not the best way to address the data, right? Because that starts to introduce error into our data system, right? Because is there only one way to enter name data? No, right? So I can go last name, first name. I can go first name, middle initial, last name. I can go first name, middle name, last name. I can, there's a whole host of ways to do that. And if I give the entry, so the data entry personnel, or if I give the form that we're using there the opportunity to be able to just say name, that's going to introduce a lot of error into my system. So instead, what I'm going to want is a table for client. And I'll have a client ID, I'll have a client last name, I'll have a client middle name or client middle initial, I'll have a client first name, and then we'll get to client city. Now, are there that many cities where we are going to pull students from Rock Valley College? Probably not, right? There's a host of cities, that's for sure the case, but it's not like there's going to be a vast number of cities that we're going to use. So my suggestion is, why don't we have a cities table? And we can put those cities inside of there. So this way, when people are using a form, when our data entry people are using a form, when unknown potential future students out there are filling out forms on a website or wherever it is that we are getting data in that we can turn into information later on, instead of being able to enter data in, why don't they get a fixed response set that they can do? What that's going to help you do is reduce error, and that's going to reduce error coming into your system, right? Because if I have the opportunity to misspell Rockford, believe me, we'll have the opportunity to misspell Rockford. I've used this example in my web design courses forever. We were working with the United Way, and we were sending out a national, essentially an update letter, right? Hey, thank you for being a United Way contributor in the past. Could you please fill out this form and let us know if you are getting, or if you have a an updated address? And we got crazy responses back. There should only be, how many? 54, 55 different state codes that you can enter in there. There's the 48 contiguous states. There's Alaska and Hawaii, that makes 50. There's District of Columbia. There's, Samoa, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands. There's one more I'm forgetting about, and that should be all that we get. But if we were to look at the aggregate data that we got back, even something as simple as state is goofed up. Now, I'm not saying that it's like a malicious ignorance there. They're not being dumb. They're not doing it on purpose. They're being rushed. This is something extra that they have to do. So we would get things like, instead of IL for the state code, we would get things like IS. And what the hell is IS, right? I can't send you a letter back there. And we can't pull that data into the system until it is corrected, right? Because if I send out a mailer to IS as the state code, it's not going to go, or potentially it's not going to go where it's supposed to go. potentially that's going to lead to bad data, because if I have a whole bunch of people suggesting that IS is a state code, but they're incorrect, but they're really good contributors, right? That's going to lead to bad information going out. So why don't we break, one line off of our client table and we'll build a cities table? Well, while we're at it, why don't we do that for states too? So that way I have a state code for everything, and that reduces the amount of error that we're liable to have in our system. I actually think we could go further than this. Why give the opportunity for mistake to zip codes when Rock Valley College knows the full sum and total of zip codes that we can use for that? So, the having more rows of data can oftentimes lead to greater error. The other side to that says the more tables you have, the more joins you have to do. So you have seen joins, and you will see more join here in the way of a relationship where we connect client ID from one table to client ID in another table, and we say this is how we explore the relationship between client ID and purchase number, because this way we can see what client has made what purchases. And that is absolutely true. There are some speed penalties there once you get to really big platforms, not necessarily here in Access, but in MySQL and other things, where if we have more tables, there's a slight performance penalty there to be made. Sure. But the actual writing of a query, the actual writing of some of the forms that you're going to have here, and the actual maintenance of the data isn't, in my experience, and by the textbook of how we should be doing this, it doesn't outweigh the advantages to having more tables with fewer rows of data in there. Now, the best answer I can give you for how will I choose, right? So, is there one thing I can tell each and every one of you with different experiences, with different needs, in different ecosystems, in different industries? Can I tell you for sure how to choose? And actually, the answer to this is yes. You do whatever the database has already been built around. Now, in the middle of a project is not the time to go, I think we should probably have more tables instead of fewer, or instead of more rows. That would be, nope, that's not the time to bring that conversation up. So if you encounter fewer tables, more rows of data, just continue on with that and maybe strike up a conversation later on down the line about, it's called normalization, where we do exactly what it sounds like. Maybe it doesn't. But we take out rows that don't necessarily have a 100% logical connection back to the table, and we create a table from that. And it really is. It's a very lengthy process. It's a difficult process, and it literally leads to yelling. Invariably, it leads to yelling when you do it in an organization. But it's a good and healthy yelling that really does help ensure that you are getting good data in so you can get good information out. So I know that's a long, long way around the block when we have 5 tables with 6 rows of data in there. Yeah, okay, I'll admit to you that that's true, but when we extrapolate out your next experience after this, it's going to be different. And at least now you can start to think about it so you don't have to worry about it when you do see it in an industry.